Welcome, folks. My name's Alvin Ashcraft. In this session, we're going to be talking about building native apps for Windows and all the different framework options for .NET developers and which framework might be the best for your team for your next project. So, a little bit about me. I've been in the software industry for about 30 years now. I spent most of that time as a software developer and architect. Over the last 3 years or so, though, I've been at Microsoft as a content developer working on Microsoft Learn on the Windows developer docs. So I work on documentation, training, code samples, all those kinds of things for pretty much anything in the Windows SDK. You may also know me from my link blog, The Morning Dew. Every day I post a bunch of links for .NET developers on alvinashcraft.com. And I've also written 3 books for Pack Publishing. 2 of them are 2 editions of Learn WinUI 3, and then I have a book on parallel programming for .NET developers. And I'm also a conference organizer. I work on the Tech Bash Developer Conference. We have an annual conference in the fall in the Poconos in Pennsylvania back home. Been doing that since 2016, and our next event is coming up this November. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start with a brief history of Windows development and where it started, where it's gone, what are the choices today. And we'll look at each of the .NET developer choices, talk about some pros and cons of each framework. We'll talk about WinForms, WPF, briefly touch on UWP, even though that's not so much supported anymore. It's supported but not maintained. WinUI, Windows App SDK, is the latest framework from Microsoft for native Windows apps. And then we'll look at some cross-platform options. We'll look at .NET MAUI, and then some third-party things like UNO Platform. We'll touch on Avalonia UI, and we'll also look at how you can take Blazor and put that into a Blazor Hybrid app in a WPF host. And we'll finish up with some guidelines for choosing a framework for your team, and then do some Q&A and list out some resources that you can use. So the history of .NET desktop apps. So the first one, when .NET was first introduced, was Windows Forms. That was the successor to VB Forms, which have been around for quite a long time now. Bill Gates demoed the first Forms designer for Visual Basic back in 1991. I've got a QR code up here that goes to that link where he demos that framework back then. 2006 was next with WPF. WPF was the first XAML-based framework from Microsoft. And that followed up with, in 2012, there was Windows 8 and the Windows 8 apps, which were also XAML. And then Universal Windows Platform evolved from that when Windows 10 was released in 2015. And with those frameworks, you could deploy to multiple platforms. You could go to the Windows desktop. UWP apps could also go to HoloLens, Xbox. So you had different platforms that you could go to. For a while, there was Windows Phone as well. We won't talk about that. WinUI is the next evolution of that. There's the same XAML schema as UWP apps, but it's decoupled from the Windows SDK. So you can update your app and update the framework without having to wait for a new version of Windows and the Windows SDK. You also don't have to target a specific minimum version of Windows like you did with UWP. It goes back to versions of Windows 10 and all of Windows 11 you can target with the WinUI apps. That same year, later in the year, Blazor Hybrid became available. It was first with .NET MAUI, but you can also do it with WinForms and WPF, so you can host your Blazor app inside any of those UI frameworks. And then .NET MAUI itself is the successor to Xamarin Forms. That was released for production in 2022. And you can target multiple platforms with that. With Windows, it compiles a WinUI app to deploy. And you can also target Android, macOS, and iOS with your MAUI apps. And we'll look at some third-party cross-platform applications. We'll be looking at the project for UNO Platform, but Avalonia is similar. They use different XAML flavors. UNO uses the WinUI XAML schema, and Avalonia uses a WPF schema. And a few things that we won't be looking at today, but they're more options for Windows developers. These are non.NET options, most of these. React Native for Windows. You can do PWAs if you're a web developer. There's also Electron, and you could just build for the browser and deploy to any platform. There's Win32 apps if you're a C++ developer, and Flutter from Google, and of course, VB6 is still out there. These are a few UI examples using some of the frameworks we'll be looking at today. The first one, up in the top there, is WinForms. It probably looks familiar to most people. It's the old looking WinForms. It looks kind of like old versions of Windows. But the one below it here is also WinForms, and that's styled with some third-party themes. I think that one's from DevExpress. So you can use custom controls, custom themes from third parties to make your WinForms look a little more modern. You can get some theming support with those. Up in the top center there, that's probably familiar to a lot of people. That's Visual Studio, and most of the Visual Studio UI today is built with WPF. There's a few legacy C++ dialogues remaining, but they're working on converting most of those over to WPF now. And below that is .NET MAUI. That's a sample weather app that's available up on GitHub. If you search for .NET MAUI weather sample, you can find that and run that code yourself. You can see the different form factors that you can get with a single code base. And the two on the right are both WinUI examples. So the current File Explorer in Windows 11 is built with WinUI. That's the one on the top. And below that is one of Apple's apps. Apple has 3 apps in the Microsoft Store now that all use WinUI. Apple Music, Apple TV, and the Apple Devices app are all WinUI apps. We're going to start with Windows Forms, and we'll talk about the pros first. So with WinForms, it's the easiest way to build a quick, simple app. You can drag and drop your UI components to quickly build a UI. There's a lot of third-party controls and themes available. WinForms has been around the longest of all the .NET options, so there's a rich ecosystem of third-party components and themes that you can get for WinForms. You have modern and legacy options, so you can build new WinForms projects either with the modern .NET up to .NET 9 now, and also .NET Framework is still supported, so you can create a new WinForms project with .NET Framework if you need to support old versions of Windows that are no longer supported. That's still out there. And if you have existing WinForms apps on .NET Framework, you can use the .NET Upgrade Assistant to update those to the current versions of .NET. And it'll give you a report of what converted successfully, where you have issues, and how you can address those issues to get your migration complete. It's still under current active development. I've got a QR code here that goes out to their roadmap on GitHub, so you can see what's upcoming from the team. And the best thing is every C# developer is a WinForms developer because there's no XAML or other UI frameworks to learn. It's all in .NET and C# or VB. VB is still supported. So a few of the drawbacks. It looks like Windows Forms, like we saw on the screenshots there, kind of dated-looking UI. They're working on improving it a bit, but it still doesn't look as modern as some of the other options. There's no GPU acceleration for UI stuff, so it's not quite as fast for any kind of animations that you'd want to do. There's no C++ support for building WinForms, so if you're a C++ developer, you won't have any support with WinForms. There's no production support today for dark mode and themes, but there is preview experimental support in .NET 9, and we'll see how you can enable that to play with that a little bit. And there's also, like I mentioned before, the third-party theming options. It's not great for touch and pen input. When it was designed back in 2022, that wasn't a big thing, touch screens. So let's look at a demo here. So this is the demo project that we'll be using for most of the projects. Let me zoom in a little so you can see what we've got here. So I've got all the different frameworks, a different project for each one. We'll be looking at the same sample in each different framework. And I've got a shared project that's got just a few model objects here. I've got a category and item object and some helper classes that just generate some dummy data for each of the apps. And this project is .NET 9, the shared project, and it's referenced by most of the other projects. UWP classic example isn't able to reference .NET 9, so that one uses a different approach. And also you can see at the bottom I have WPF version 8, .NET 8 and 9 versions. So the .NET 8 one can't reference that either, but everything else is using the same shared project. Let's open up our WinForms. You can see the designer opening up in Visual Studio. It's a pretty simple app. I've got a few controls at the top to add new items to the shopping list, and then a data grid that displays the existing items. And you have checkboxes here where you'll be able to say if you've purchased the item on your list. And you can also delete items here. So let's run this guy. Here's the running app. You can see we can check the boxes to say we purchased these items. I can highlight, I can use the delete button down here, or I can just press delete on my keyboard if I want to delete any items. And I can add a donut to the list. So it's pretty simple, works pretty well, and you're able to build something like this very simply. Drag and drop all these things. I just drag the controls onto the form to build this. And we'll see the same kind of demo for each of the frameworks. But let's jump back to the presentation and talk about our next one. Next up, we'll talk about WPF advantages. So some of the advantages of WPF, if you're new to XAML development, WPF has a XAML visual designer, so you can drag and drop your controls onto the screen to build your UI. It doesn't create the best XAML. A lot of more experienced XAML developers prefer to write it by hand. When you drag and drop and resize things in the designer, they don't always resize very nicely at runtime. There's XAML hot reload for UI debugging. So if you're debugging your app, you've got it up on the screen, you need to make a few tweaks to the UI. You can do that without stopping and restarting the debugger. You can just make those changes and hit the hot reload button in Visual Studio, and it'll refresh your changes in the UI while you're running. It's GPU accelerated for the UI, so unlike WinForms, it's better for graphics and animations. It supports MVVM for data binding, so that makes it easier to unit test your view models. So the MVVM is model, view, view model. So your view is the UI, your view models are the things that bind your data to the UI, and then you've got your backend with the model classes. Like WinForms, it has modern and legacy support, so you can build for .NET Framework or .NET 9. A lot of third-party control support, since it's also been around a pretty long time, since 2006 now. And so you can get third-party controls, you can get theming. It doesn't have the best built-in theming. We'll see how that works, but it's getting a lot better. That you can now modernize your UI a little bit to make it look closer to WinUI. It's also in active development. They've got the roadmap up on GitHub, and like I mentioned, the theming support is getting better. .NET 9 released the Windows 11 theming look. It's not out of the box, but I'll show you how you can quickly enable that. And WPF apps are great for enterprise apps because of the large ecosystem for third-party controls. You can do pretty much anything with WPF these days. And it's got great multi-window support. So if you've got complex UI with lots of different windows, WPF does great with that. talk about some drawbacks of WPF. If you're not familiar with XAML, there's a little bit of a learning curve. The designer helps with that, but it's not all C# like Windows Forms. There's also no C++ support like WinForms. It's VB and C# only. And the next bullet I've crossed out. There's now fluent design support with the latest .NET 9 WPF. It's better for touch and input. It's not the best, but it's a lot better than Windows Forms. You can make your controls a little bit bigger in WPF to make them touch-friendly. It has some pen support in the framework. The UI performance is not as optimized as WinUI, but it's still pretty good. It's better than Windows Forms, not as good as WinUI and UWP. And we can take a look at a demo here. We'll look at the same project. Close this. And we have two versions, like I mentioned, of the WPF app. We'll look at the WPF with .NET 8 first. And I mentioned I couldn't reference the shared project, so what we've done here is I have the shared project. I'm referencing the files without referencing the project directly. So we're using the same category, item, and shopping list helper, but they're being compiled within the .NET 8 project. And we can open up the window. You can see how the designer looks at the top. So you get, got a copy-paste error there. So we've got, zoom in a little bit, our form at the top. You can drag and drop these controls to move them. You can resize things a little bit. And it updates the XAML in the bottom pane when you do that. So we've got the same layout here. So we've got a list of controls at the top for adding items. And we've got a data grid at the bottom to display the items. And in the XAML code, you can see you have separate code to define your columns, your headers. So we've got a stack panel for the stuff at the top where it stacks things horizontally. And let's run this and take a look. You can see it looks a little bit nicer than the WinForms version, but it's still a bit dated looking. And we'll see in the other project how you can fix that with .NET 9. But it works just the same. We'll add our same donut to the list. And I can check and uncheck items to say if they've been purchased. And we can delete items from the list. Did I? Oh, thank you very much. That's why it looks dated. But the WPF will look like the designer version. There we go. But it does work just the same. Looks a little bit nicer than WinForms. Let's add our donut to the list. There we go. I can check. I can delete. And it works just the same. So the WPF 9 version of this, let's switch over to that before I forget. It's the exact same code with the addition of something in my app.xaml. So the app.xaml is the file that launches the entire app. So all the execution starts from here. And inside here, you can define your own resources that will be accessible globally throughout the app. So to get the new theming, all you have to do is add a dictionary that references these new Fluent designs that come out of the box. And I believe in future versions of WPF, they'll make this default so you don't have to add this yourself. But for .NET 9, you do have to reference this fluent.xaml to get the new look. So let's run this one. There we go. So from that little bit of XAML code, we now have a whole different look to the UI. It looks a lot more like a WinUI app. Picks up the dark mode automatically from my Windows. Get the drop down. We'll add our donut. There we go. Theming's not perfect. A little bit of accessibility issue here with the delete button. The white text is a little bit hard to read, but that should be improved with the future versions. Works just the same. I can delete items. I can check them. And let's just take a quick look at the code behind here, too, so you can see how we're populating this data. The WinForms is working pretty much the same. Everything is in the code behind of the UI. So I've got some collections. I've got the item view source. I've got a list of categories and items that I'm populating in the constructor. So I'm just calling this helper class to create my categories and to create my list of items. And I'm binding those to the UI here in the window loaded. And there's some code to add and delete and to clear the fields at the top after I add. All right, so let's jump back over and talk about the next framework. All right, so next up is UWP, and we'll go through this pretty quickly because UWP is in maintenance mode at this point. Good things about UWP is it's fast. It uses .NET Native for the runtime. So it was built to be able to run it on all these different platforms like Windows Phone and the HoloLens. So to run on those platforms, you need something that's small. You need something that's memory efficient. So UWP is great for all those things. It's got the Xbox and HoloLens support, even though HoloLens is discontinued now. And I haven't seen many people building Xbox apps with UWP these days. It's got a XAML designer like WPF, so you can drag and drop your UI. It's great for touch and pen. It's got themes built in, so you don't have to add any extra XAML code. It just works with the light and dark mode, picks all that up automatically from Windows. It has data binding like WPF. I'm not doing the MVVM approach in this app yet. We'll see some model view model when we get to the WinUI app. It's got a set of controls and libraries that are open source called WinUI 2, and that gives you some Fluent design look. The Fluent that comes with that is kind of Windows 10 looking. It's not updated to look like Windows 11. It's got great security with the Windows sandboxing. So like on mobile platforms, how you have to declare what capabilities your app has. Is it going to have network access, file access? You have to declare all those in your manifest when you deploy to the store so that users are going to know what your app can do. So out of the box, you only have a very limited set of access for your apps. And there is new preview support for .NET 9 with UWP. That's the one enhancement they've made. They've done this to make it a little bit easier to migrate your UWP apps to WinUI, so you could take the first step of updating them to .NET 9 before you migrate over to WinUI. Some drawbacks. These are the big ones. There's no more feature updates coming for UWP apps. It'll continue to get important bug fixes and security updates as it goes. And the WinUI 2 libraries are also getting no new features or controls in them. .NET Native, if you're using the older .NET Native version of UWP, you don't get the current modern .NET features. So it's stuck back on like C# 8 is the newest language features that you can use with that. But you can now go to .NET 9 in preview. It gives you that upgrade path, and you can use modern .NET features when you go that way. No Fluent UI updates. Like I said, it's the Windows 10 looking UX. The support lifetime is unknown. Right now, it's supported for the known future, but at some point, I'm sure they're going to discontinue support for UWP apps. .NET standard libraries, if you're using the .NET native version of UWP, you have to use .NET standard for any kind of shared libraries, NuGet packages. So you can't use a lot of the modern NuGet packages that are available. The MSOL, the Microsoft Security Libraries, announced that they're no longer supporting UWP or Xamarin. And I mentioned briefly earlier that UWP is coupled to Windows SDK versions. So when you create a new UWP app, you have to say, this is the version I'm targeting for Windows, and this is the minimum supported version of Windows. So if you want to get any new features, you have to retarget your app to a later version of Windows. Let's look at our sample app now. Okay, right. Close some of these. And switch. I've got two UWP apps. We'll look at the universal one first. That's the old .NET Native version. And the layout is pretty much the same. We've got the main page with the XAML for the stack panel stuff at the top for the entry controls, and then I'm using a list. Oh, sorry about that. Still extending. There we go. Good? All right. So we've got the XAML for the stack panel at the top, and the list view at the bottom for displaying the list of items. And you can see even in design view, it's picking up dark mode automatically. Let's run this. And errors. Let's build that quickly. Form could not be loaded. All right. Well, let's try the .NET 9 version of this. Cross our fingers. It looks exactly the same, but it's using .NET 9. Awesome. Let's see. So let's build this. Embedded resources. Let me take a look at the universal one again. Now this looks like it pasted something here. I've had weird issues with selecting a project and things just pasting without me pasting. Let's try that again with the universal project. There we go. User error. So this is the UWP app. It's picked up my dark mode, and things look a little bit different than the other apps. This looks kind of Windows 10-like. Everything has the angled corners like Windows 10. Got the square buttons. But everything works the same. I can add a donut to the list. And you can see how things kind of fade into the UI. It's got a little more animation to it out of the box. When I delete an item, you see it'll kind of swipe it away and the items slide up. A little bit of animation here too. All right, so let's close this, and we'll try one more time to see if the new one will compile and run. File task cannot be limited. This is still in preview, so I can show you there is some workarounds needed to make some of this stuff work with .NET 9. I had to do all this COM stuff to make all my data binding work. The data binding for lists isn't currently working with the .NET 9 version of UWP, so I had to do some workarounds for that. But the app runs and looks exactly the same as the other version, but it's using .NET 9, and you can see that here in our dependencies. We've got the .NET Core libraries referenced, and in the universal one, it's using the Universal Windows Platform references instead. So the other difference between these two, I can't reference this project in my universal app, so I just pulled those same files into this project But with .NET 9, I was able to reference that project. Let's switch back to the presentation and get to the next framework. Next up is WinUI. So WinUI is the UI component of the Windows App SDK. It's the UI framework that's technically called WinUI 3, but the product team has been dropping the 3 lately and just calling it WinUI, since WinUI 2 isn't really supported and the 3 isn't really a version. There's never going to be a WinUI 4, so everything's just WinUI and Windows App SDK. It supports the latest Fluent design in Windows 11, so it looks the most modern of all these frameworks. You get the features and the controls of UWP without being coupled to the Windows SDK, and you also always get the latest versions of .NET. So I can build a WinUI app with either .NET 8 or .NET 9 today. I've got C++ and C# support in here. There's no VB support with WinUI, so you have to build either C# or C++ with those apps. It does get frequent updates with Windows App SDK. So version 1.7 came out late last year. 1.8 is out in experimental preview right now, and that should be released in a couple of months. Some of the latest versions, 1.6 brought native ahead-of-time compiling, so that made things a lot faster. Like most .NET 9 features all have AOT now, so you can build faster apps that strip out things that aren't needed at runtime. Some title bar improvements. You have the modern-looking title bar, like in the Microsoft Store app. You have a search bar built into the title bar. All of that kind of stuff is supported now with the new title bar and WinUI. 1.7 brought some things that have been missing for a long time that UWP had, things like authorization. OAuth 2 is now supported with WinUI. It's got a new background task manager for managing multiple tasks in the background. Camera capture UI if you wanted to interface with the cameras in your PCs. And they've started work on the XAML designer. There is currently no XAML designer for WinUI, so you have to hand code all your XAML. But they've started working on that designer, and the first release I expect is going to be a read-only version of that. So you won't be able to drag and drop things in there, but you'll at least be able to see what you're building as you're writing your XAML code. You'll see the XAML preview up in the other window. And the roadmap up on GitHub, I've got a QR code to go out there and see what they're working on. In the latest servicing release that came out during Microsoft Build last week, they released some of the Windows AI APIs in the stable release, 1.7.2, and also in the latest Windows App SDK 1.8 experimental release. There's a lot more AI stuff in there. You get the same data binding, and we'll see the MVVM implementation in this next project. It's great for modern experiences in hardware. Touch and pen input is excellent. And you can upgrade from UWP apps using the .NET Upgrade Assistant. So it'll give you a report of what upgraded successfully, what you need to change, what's not supported. And right now, the Windows teams are pushing WinUI as the top choice for native Windows apps. So if it's got all the features you need, it's really the way you want to go for building a new app. Like I mentioned earlier with the screenshots, the File Explorer is using it. The latest Photos app in Windows is using WinUI, and Apple's apps are all using that now, and Adobe has a Fresco app that uses WinUI as well. A few drawbacks. The XAML designer I mentioned, it's not there yet, but coming soon. So you've got the XAML learning curve. If your developers don't know XAML, they'll have to pick that up to build WinUI apps. XAML hot reload and the UI debugging I mentioned earlier, that can help with that, so you can run your app and make changes at runtime. There's no F# or VB support, C# and C++ only. No Xbox or HoloLens if you're working on upgrading your UWP apps. And there's no built-in UI validation. It's something that UWP has. So you get the little indicators on your UI if you have things that are required or require certain formats. You can't put those little decorators on your UI automatically. There are some workarounds that you can do to support that. In my WinUI book, I have an example of how you can implement that. And let's look at the demo for this guy. All right, we're switched. Oops. There we go. So in my WinUI project, we'll take a look at this code. So in here, I've got a main window and the main view model because I'm using MVVM. So we'll look at the view model first. Now, if you're not familiar with MVVM, it makes data binding simple. You can bind to properties. You can bind commands to methods in here. So you can be able to have your button click go directly to, say, an add method or a delete method. I'm using the MVVM framework in the .NET Community Toolkit. And it makes the code a lot simpler to use that. All you have to do is make your view model class a partial class, and you have to inherit from observable object. And by doing that, it uses the C# source generators, so you don't have to write all of the members of your class. You just have to write the private ones. So this category's private member here, by putting the observable property attribute on here, it'll automatically generate the public property for you. So you can run it and you can access a category's public property like this, even though there's no code in this file for that getter and setter. So I'm doing the same thing with my items. And my item name, I've also added an attribute to enable some enabling and disabling of the UI. So I'm saying anytime this item name changes, I want to check if the add command should be enabled. So I only want to enable my add button if I have a name filled out and if I have a category selected at the top. So these two attributes will help with that. So if I have a selected category and an item name, then we're going to enable the add command. And that logic is down here in the can add item. It's checking for those two fields to see if they're filled out. And for my add method, I add the relay command attribute, and that's going to create a public method called add command that I can bind to in the UI. And here it's checking can add items to see if it should be enabled or not. So let's switch over to that project and run that. Okay, so this looks kind of similar to the UWP version, but things are a little bit more rounded, like Windows 11. Add my donut. See, we get the same kind of animations when things are added and deleted. Things slide up. I can check and uncheck items just like the other one. And I've got the modern title bar added here too. You can see that I've got shopping list, and then I can have a search box where I can type, let's see, apples, and it'll show me apples from my list down here. And I have code in there that when I select it, it deletes that item. So to add the modern title bar, that code is pretty simple. You have to add a title bar element in your XAML. And I'm adding the auto-suggest box in the middle with the search code, and then it's binding to the name to get the drop-down list. And I believe in the code behind is where I have that. I've got my delete button code. I've got a little bit more code here to set the title bar. So I'm setting the title bar on the app window. Setting the height, I want this to be a little bit taller so it fits that search box. And I'm setting the display name. And then I've got a text change event to do my search. And this query submitted is when I hit enter on the item, and it removes that from the list. Let's jump back to the slides here, and we'll talk about our last couple frameworks. Next up is .NET MAUI. So with MAUI, you can target Windows, Android, iOS, and macOS. You can do platform-specific implementations for each one. So if you have anything that works differently on the different platforms, maybe your file access, your photos, a lot of those things are available in some MAUI helper classes so that you don't have to do platform-specific code for each one. But there's some more complex things where you may need to do that. The MAUI helpers encapsulate a lot of that functionality these days. You can change the appearance by platform. There are some XAML helpers that you can add to say only show this part of the UI if it's Android, or if it's iOS, you can show this bit. It's easy to learn if you're already a XAML developer. All the XAML flavors in WinUI, WPF, MAUI, they're all kind of similar. A little bit of different naming with XAML. In MAUI, things are named a little bit differently, but it works pretty much the same. You can also create your UI in C# with MAUI and something called C# markup. With that, you can follow the MVU pattern, which is also used in frameworks like Flutter. It compiles to WinUI when you're building for Windows, so you'll see the MAUI app on Windows looks a lot like WinUI because it is, just a little bit different style. You can develop in Visual Studio or VS Code. There's a MAUI extension for VS Code that lets you build your apps there. You can build and run. And MAUI also has Blazor Hybrid. So if you want to build your Blazor apps and then host that in a mobile app with MAUI, that's supported there as well. And it's under active development, and you can use that QR code to check out their roadmap. A few drawbacks, and then we'll look at a demo. So there is some platform-specific code for some things when you want to write some native features on one of the platforms. Not every control is always supported on every platform, so you may have to do some custom code for things like that. No XAML Designer in Visual Studio like some of the other platforms. You can use hot reload to do your runtime changes in the design. There's only C#. You don't get C++, F# or VB. You can use F# if you're doing Blazor Hybrid. You can do F# code inside of there. And Windows support is there, but iOS and Android are really their top platforms. The people coming over from Xamarin, they're really looking to make sure that everybody gets migrated from Xamarin, and most of those existing customers are using the other platforms. There are some limitations with the UI customization. You can't do the custom content controls with some of the controls. Performance is getting better with each release. There used to be some performance issues with MAUI, but that's much improved now. And let's look at a demo while we've got some time here. All right. So we'll switch over to MAUI. And let's just run this. This is going to look a lot like the WinUI app, but it's got some purple buttons and things. There we go. So we got the same animations when we delete items. This is all just WinUI code. So we can add chicken to the list. That all is just the same. And with MAUI, you can have other platforms in your drop-down. So you can do iOS, Android. I can't demo Android on this machine. I've got an ARM machine. This is one of the Copilot Plus PCs, which doesn't support the Google emulators. And the Windows subsystem for Android used to be a nice option for debugging on Android, but that lost its support in Windows in March. They just dropped that. So let's talk about our last couple options, Blazor Hybrid and Uno. So Blazor Hybrid. We're going to look at the two slides here, and then we'll do the demos one after the other, just to save a few minutes. So the pros and cons of Blazor Hybrid. So it's web, so there's no XAML learning curve. If your team is web developers and they know Blazor, you can build your UI all in Blazor and then host it inside WinForms, WPF, or MAUI. It's got CSS styling, so if you're a great CSS developer, you can do that in your Blazor apps. .NET compatibility, so you've got the latest .NET 8, .NET 9 support, and you can do .NET interop between your layers, so you can do things in your .NET host and then make calls down into your Blazor app as well. You can use, like I mentioned, WPF WinForms for desktop hosts, or you can go mobile with MAUI. Some cons, interop, there's usually some costs, performance. If you get bugs in one layer or the other, you've got kind of two different chances to have bugs in the framework. There can be accessibility quirks when you're embedding web inside the desktop app. Keyboard shortcuts don't always go where you want them to go into your web app. And you've got to worry about support across two different of Microsoft products. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like web. You get that bouncy feel when you're scrolling on things. And let's talk about the Uno pros and cons. So Uno platform is a lot like .NET MAUI. In addition to the Windows, Android, iOS, and Mac support, though, it also has Linux support, and you can deploy also to the web with WebAssembly. You can do platform-specific implementations like you can with MAUI. You've got some different Windows platform options as well. If you need to target older versions of Windows, you can use Skia to run on Windows 7 and later, or you can use the later WinUI stuff to run on the current versions of Windows. Uno views and view models look almost exactly like WinUI. In my example and in my book, I just copy-pasted all my code from the WinUI app into the Uno app, and it just runs. You can use C# markup like you can with MAUI, so you can build your UI all in C#. You don't need to build with XAML if you don't want to. They have a Figma plugin, so if you've got designers on your team that know Figma, they can build your UIs for you there, and then you can just generate your Uno apps from that. And just a couple weeks ago, Uno released their new Studio app and Hot Design, which lets you have a visual designer, so you can, at runtime, actually drag and drop controls and make changes to your app while you're debugging. They've got different theming options. You can do Fluent Design. You can also do Apple's Cupertino design or Google's Material Design. And with Uno, you can build in Visual Studio, or on other platforms, you can use JetBrains Rider or VS Code. And some cons, no VB or F#. It's a third-party solution. If your company's a little shy about using third-party solutions for things, that could be an issue. You do have to pay for advanced support, and for the new Android or Uno Platform Studio and Hot Design, that's a paid product now. They have monthly and yearly licensing options for that. And platform-specific code could be required when you're going across platforms. So let's jump into those two demos. There we go. Oops. So the Blazor Hybrid project is in my solution here. The Uno project is in its own solution. It doesn't support having other projects in the solution, so that's in a different instance. Let's switch over to Blazor Hybrid and look at the project structure a little bit too. So the Blazor Hybrid project is a WPF project, but it's got some Blazor components in here too. You can see it's got a WW root like you would with any other Blazor project. It's got some Razor components. My shopping list.razor is the main component that's going to be hosted inside the WPF app. And then I've got my WPF main window that's going to be launched. Let's look at the main window quickly. So in here, there's not much to it. I've got my parent grid, and inside there, I've got a Blazor Web View component. And then, here we go. So I'm telling it which Blazor component I want to run when the app runs. So let's look at that. I'm not the greatest web developer or CSS developer, so this isn't very nice looking, but functions just the same as all the other apps. I've got a drop down to select a category. We can add a donut to the list. And that adds it down here at the bottom. I can check items, delete items. Works just like everything else, but this is all in Blazor. And let's quickly wrap up by looking at the UNO project, and then we can see if there's any questions. This is my UNO project. So inside the presentation folder is where all the views and view models live. So like I mentioned, I just copied and pasted my WinUI code into the main view model and the main page here. And I imported my item and category and helper classes. So I'm running the Windows App SDK package version of this for Windows. And it looks pretty similar to the others. It actually looks pretty close to the MAUI app. They've styled things with some purple buttons here. They're kind of rounded, but everything works just the same. I can delete items. I can add a donut to the list as usual. And that gets added at the bottom. So the other options I have here, I've just got, when you create a new UNO project, you can select which platforms you want to add. And because my machine doesn't support Android, I didn't add that here, but it's got WebAssembly in the list. I could select that and run in WebAssembly. But we are just about out of time, so let's get to the slides to wrap up, and then we can do some Q&A. So making your choice. So there's some things to consider when you're making your choice. What programming language does your team know? What are they comfortable with? For UI frameworks, does your team know XAML? Do they know web? Are they more comfortable just building in C# and .NET? Do you need a drag and drop designer if you want to build things quickly, or if you're not so familiar with the XAML language? What .NET support do you need? Do you have to support older versions of Windows using .NET Framework, or can you just build all the latest and greatest with .NET 8 or 9? Do you need touch support? Do you need cross-platform options, or are you going to be Windows only? And long-term support options, it's a big one to consider if you're thinking about UWP. And you should always look at all the current features in the roadmap to make sure that the one you're picking has all the features that you need, or that they're coming very soon within your deployment timeline. And I've had a couple of images here from the presentation that the WinUI team did at Build last year. Some of the benefits of WinUI and WPF with .NET 9. Here's a list of resources. That QR code goes to my repo, my speaking repo. I've got all of my slides for every talk that I do. All the demo code is up there. And I've got a list of links in a markdown file with everything you could need to get started with any of these frameworks. And I've got links to my books, my social links if you want to contact me or follow me. And that's it. Any questions from the audience?